For 30 years, your greatest strength was your discipline to stay the course. Every piece of financial advice, every market downturn, every talking head screaming about a crash, you ignored it all and stuck to the plan. You bought the dips, you rebalanced methodically, and you trusted the long-term averages. That steadfastness is the reason you're here, on the brink of retirement, with a number on a spreadsheet that says you've won. But what if I told you that in the next 24 months, that same discipline, the very virtue that built your entire net worth, could become your single greatest point of failure? The idea feels wrong, like a betrayal of the core principles that got you this far. But the final approach to retirement is not just another leg of the journey. It's a re-entry sequence. And using launch phase logic now can burn your entire system to the ground. I remember looking at my own projections about 2 years out from my date. The numbers were all green. The system I had built and trusted for over 2 decades was working perfectly. But then you'd read the headlines, you'd see another volatile swing in the market, and there was this cold feeling in my gut that the map I'd been using for the entire hike might not be the right map for the last 2 miles. It's a strange kind of pressure because you can't really talk about it with anyone. To your friends, it sounds like you're complaining about a good problem to have. But the anxiety is real, and it's isolating. You're just there, alone in your office late at night with your spreadsheet, wondering if the spreadsheet even knows what year it is anymore. That feeling, that late-night dialogue with a piece of software that holds your future, isn't a hypothetical for me. I pulled the trigger and retired at 54, which means at 52 I was sitting exactly where you are now, staring at the same screens, feeling that same cold knot forming in my stomach. I had my number, I had my date, and I was watching a market that looked nothing like the calm, predictable environment I had based all my projections on for the last decade. My plan was perfect. It was also designed for a planet that had stopped spinning. I quickly realized I had to run a whole new set of numbers. The first set was about retiring. The second, more important set, was about surviving the 2 years before I retired. It's a completely different engineering problem that requires a different kind of thinking. So over the next few minutes, I'm going to walk you through the 5 critical adjustments I would make if I were 2 years from retirement in this exact market. This isn't a generic pep talk to stay calm and carry on. This is a specific, actionable checklist to stress test your current plan against the unique sequence of return risks you face in this final window. We're going to redefine the actual problem. We're going to build a proper financial runway for landing, and we're going to run a failure analysis on your retirement budget. We'll shift you from that low-grade, persistent anxiety to the focused confidence of knowing exactly which parts of your system need a final diagnostic before you go live. If that sounds like the conversation you need to be having right now, make sure you're subscribed, because we are about to debug the most critical 24 months of your financial life. The first critical adjustment is to redefine the actual risk you're facing. For your entire career, the biggest threat was volatility that could scare you into selling at the wrong time. You solved that with discipline. But in this final 2-year window, the primary danger is not market volatility itself, but a significant downturn happening at the precise moment you lose your 2 greatest assets for recovery: time and a salary. This is the sequence of returns risk, and it's a completely different engineering problem. For 30 years, you've been building a rocket ship, a high-growth engine with an aggressive trajectory designed for accumulation. But the last 2 years are not part of the launch. They are the re-entry sequence. You don't need a bigger engine now. You need a heat shield. Applying launch phase logic during atmospheric re-entry will burn your entire system to the ground. Let's make this brutally specific. A 30% market drop when you're 35 is a gift. You buy the dip with your next decade of paychecks and your portfolio recovers stronger than ever. But a 30% drop when you're 63, the year you plan to start drawing income, is a catastrophic system failure. You're forced to sell triple the number of shares to generate the same income you budgeted for, permanently crippling your portfolio's ability to recover and sustain you for the next 30 years. The math isn't complicated, but it's unforgiving. The market doesn't know you're 2 years away from pulling the trigger. It doesn't see your spreadsheet. It has no memory and no agenda. It's simply a force of nature, and your proximity to retirement is what turns a standard storm into a direct hit. Your 30-year accumulation plan was the rocket. Your 2-year retirement transition plan is the heat shield. They are not made of the same materials. This isn't a philosophical point. It's a statement about engineering and materials science. The systems that get you to orbit are fundamentally different from the systems that get you back to Earth safely. One is built for thrust and aggressive growth against the pull of gravity. The other is built for deceleration and the controlled absorption of immense, system-threatening pressure. To believe that the same strategy, the same allocation, the same mindset applies to both phases is to ignore the fundamental physics of the transition. You have to stop building the rocket and start engineering the landing capsule, and you have to do it now. This brings us to the second adjustment. Build a proper runway, not just a standard emergency fund. Your 6-month emergency fund was designed to protect you from a job loss. Your pre-retirement runway is designed to protect you from the market itself. The goal is to create a cash or near-cash buffer large enough to cover 18 to 24 months of your non-discretionary expenses, allowing you to live without selling a single share if the market is down during your first 2 years of retirement. My own spreadsheet said I needed $1.7 million to retire. My gut, however, said I needed 2 full years of living expenses, sitting in something as boring as a high-yield savings account, before I could even think about it. The spreadsheet was right about the final destination, but my gut was right about the landing gear. I remember this moment with perfect clarity. I was in my home office here in Austin, about a year before I planned to retire. It was late, maybe 11 p.m. on a Tuesday, and the only light was the blue glow from my 2 monitors. I could hear the faint, distant hum of late-night traffic on the Mopac Expressway. On one screen was my master retirement spreadsheet, a complex web of projections I'd trusted for a decade, glowing green. It said I was on track. On the other screen, the S&P 500 chart was a sea of red. And I had this thought I just couldn't shake. The math says I'm fine. The spreadsheet says I've won. So why do I feel like I'm standing on a trap door? It was a cold knot in my stomach that logic couldn't seem to fix. The breakthrough came when I realized the problem wasn't the math in the spreadsheet. It was the sequence of events in the real world. My plan was perfect for a world that wasn't currently on fire. So I minimized that master spreadsheet and opened a blank one. In cell A1, I typed runway fund. For the next hour, I ignored my net worth and calculated exactly how much cash my wife and I would need to live for 24 months without selling a single asset. As I typed in the final number, $120,000, that knot in my stomach finally dissolved. It wasn't the big number that brought me peace. It was this smaller, tangible number that gave me control. If you've ever felt that disconnect between the numbers and your gut, hit the like button. The third adjustment is to execute a strategic de-risking, not a panic sell. There is a critical difference. Panic selling is an emotional reaction to market noise. Strategic de-risking is a logical acknowledgement that your personal time horizon has collapsed from decades to months. Shifting your asset allocation from, say, 80% equities down to 60% in this final window isn't market timing. It's system recalibration. Think of it like this. Before you deploy a critical piece of software, you don't just test if it works under ideal conditions. You run a stress test. You push it to its limits to see where it breaks. Your portfolio is no different. Reducing your exposure now isn't an act of fear. It's the final, most important stress test before you go live with your retirement. This is where that old mantra of stay the course requires a critical update. For 30 years, that phrase was your North Star, and it served you well. It helped you ignore the noise and build the wealth you have today. But you have to ask yourself, what if the course you've been on for 3 decades has led you directly to the edge of a cliff you didn't see coming? At that point, continuing to stay the course is no longer a sign of discipline. It's a sign of denial. Staying the course is discipline. Knowing when the course has led to the edge of a cliff is wisdom. The wisdom required now is to recognize that the terrain has changed and that a course correction isn't a failure of the original plan. It's the successful execution of its final phase. The fourth adjustment is to run a failure analysis on your retirement budget. A budget created during a decade-long bull market is, by definition, a fair weather plan. It's a work of fiction based on ideal conditions. I know because mine was. I had this beautiful budget, planned down to the dollar for travel, hobbies, and dining out. It took me 6 months to realize it was useless under pressure because I hadn't rigorously separated my need-to-have expenses from my nice-to-have expenses. You have to do this now. Open your projected budget and split it into 2 columns, essential and adjustable. Your essential column is your mortgage, utilities, health care, and basic groceries. Everything else is adjustable. That essential number, your bare-bones survival cost, is the most important number in your plan right now. Finally, you need to stop passively consuming market commentary and start actively interrogating your own plan. I want you to sit down this week and answer 3 questions the market is forcing you to answer right now. 1. Where will my first year of retirement income come from if my portfolio is down 20% on my official retirement date? Write down the specific accounts you will draw from. 2. Have I calculated my healthcare costs for the gap between leaving my job and Medicare kicking in, using this year's inflation numbers, not last year's rosy projections? 3. Does my spouse or partner fully understand and agree with the specific adjustments we will make if this downturn lasts longer than we expect? This isn't about predicting the future. It's about debugging your system for the most likely points of failure. You see these adjustments, redefining the risk, building the runway, de-risking your allocation, and stress testing your budget. They aren't 4 separate strategies. They are 4 integrated components of a single engineering project, building the heat shield for your re-entry. The risk definition is your blueprint. The cash runway is your primary ablative material, designed to burn off so your core vehicle doesn't. The de-risking is the precise calibration of your angle of approach, bleeding off excess velocity before you hit the densest part of the atmosphere. And the budget failure analysis? That's the final systems check, ensuring every component can withstand the gravitational forces of reality, not just the vacuum of a spreadsheet. This isn't about abandoning the mission. It's about shifting from launch protocol to landing protocol. It's the final, most critical phase of a 30-year flight. I remember the night I finally built my own runway fund spreadsheet. It was 1:17 a.m. in my Austin office. I had spent hours staring at my main portfolio, that massive $1.7 million number that was supposed to represent security, but instead just felt like a source of abstract anxiety. But after I calculated that smaller, tangible number, the $120,000 I needed to live for 2 years, a different feeling took over. For the first time in months, I felt my shoulders, which I hadn't realized were tensed up to my ears, actually drop. I closed the laptop, and the silence of the house felt different. It wasn't the empty silence of worry anymore. It was the quiet, solid silence of a problem that had been solved. That's the feeling I want for you. The peace that comes not from a big number, but from a controllable one. This brings us to the fundamental turn in thinking you must make. For 30 years, the core principle was to trust the system and ignore the noise. That was the right move. It required immense discipline to stay the course through multiple market cycles, and that discipline is what brought you to this exact point. But the final approach requires a different virtue. The system you built has delivered you to your destination. Now you have to know when you've arrived. Because if you continue to apply that same stay-the-course logic, you'll sail right past the harbor and back out into the storm. Staying the course when you're accumulating is discipline. But knowing that the course has now led you to the edge of the cliff you must land on, that is wisdom. So this is your permission to graduate from discipline to wisdom. This is your permission to open a new spreadsheet that has nothing to do with your total net worth and everything to do with your first 24 months of cash flow. It's your permission to trim your equity exposure not as an act of fear, but as a final, sober act of engineering by a pilot who knows the landing is more important than the cruising altitude. The anxiety you're feeling isn't a sign that your plan has failed. It's the final system alert telling you it's time to take manual control for the landing sequence. The person who built the rocket over 30 years is the same person who has the skill to land it. You just have to trust that you know how. If this final checklist was a useful diagnostic for your own system, make sure you're subscribed, because this is the kind of engineering we do here every week. But this isn't just about passive consumption. It's about active implementation. So my question for the comments this time is more forward-looking, and it's a call to action for yourself. What is the single biggest adjustment you are committing to making in the next 90 days after watching this? Is it calculating the exact number for your runway fund? Is it scheduling that difficult but necessary conversation with your partner about the budget failure analysis? Or is it executing that strategic de-risking you know you need to do? Put it down in writing. Let's hold each other accountable for turning insight into action, because a plan is only as good as its execution. Ultimately, remember that the last 2 years are not about simply protecting your plan as it exists. They are about making your plan bulletproof. A bulletproof plan isn't one that merely hopes for a calm, predictable market. It's one that anticipates a turbulent re-entry and has the specific systems, buffers, and protocols in place to navigate that turbulence without incurring catastrophic structural failure. This is the final engineering sign-off, the moment you transition from being the architect of your retirement to becoming the pilot responsible for landing it safely on your own terms. The destination has been programmed for decades. Your job now is to master the final descent. Retired at 54. No spreadsheet left behind.